Here, good afternoon. I'm State Senator Shannon Grove, and I want to thank all of you for joining us here today. I'm incredibly honored to stand alongside all of my colleagues that are here from both sides of the aisle to advocate for survivors and bring awareness to issues that we all passionately and deeply care about, which is children's protection measures. Many of us have seen the recent media surrounding these troubled teen facilities across the country. The widespread abuse that these programs have spurred is an outpouring of attention and legislative reform. Although California previously sent foster youth to these out-of-state programs, in recent years, the legislature and the governor have done significant work in order to decertify these facilities and ensure that California's children are returned home. A report done in 2020 by the Imprint and the San Francisco Chronicle reported that California was sending foster youth and youth offenders, our most vulnerable children, our most vulnerable members of society, with several mental and behavioral issues and conditions to these out-of-state facilities that are for-profit facilities. And many of these facilities, such as the one that Paris Hilton was sent to at the age of 17, children were being physically, mentally, sexually, and emotionally abused by staff. In response to these reports of abuse, legislation by previously Assemblymember Stone banned these placement of children in these out-of-state residential facilities and ordered that all of our teens be returned home by 2023. Additionally, Governor Gavin Newsom authorized or allocated $8 million to bring our children home to have proper placement here in our state. Many of the foster youth who returned to California were put in STRTPs, which are licensed by the State Department of Social Services. Although California has been proactive in addressing the troubled teen industry and ensuring the health and safety of our foster youth, there still is work that needs to be done. STRTPs serve children and young adults who need increased level of care. These treatment facilities have the ability to use restraints and seclusion rooms. If a facility believes that the patient is in danger to themselves or others, STRTPs are required to report all restraint and seclusion use treatments to the Department of Social Services. The department is then required to put this information online and make it available to the public. However, this information has never been publicly available. Some of California's most vulnerable children have been housed in these STRTPs, and including foster youth who have previously been sexually exploited. Knowing what these children have experienced, we must require the highest level of transparency and accountability in care for our vulnerable population. That's why I've introduced SB 1043. It's a simple transparency measure that will require the Department of Social Services to create a dashboard by January 1st, 2026, and display data for the use of restraints and seclusion rooms at these STRTPs. This data will include a number of licensed incidents when restraints and seclusion rooms are used, and the duration of the time that they were used, and were there any injuries or deaths, along with any other necessary data. Currently, STRTPs are required to debrief patients in the time of restraints and seclusion rooms. SB 1043 will also require the Department of Social Services to include on the dashboard a written description of those debriefs, excluding any identifying information on the patient or the staff member involved. This is a small but critical measure, and I just am so honored today to have the sponsor of SB 1043, the CEO of 1111 Media Impact, and a survivor, a lived experienced expert of the troubled teen industry, Paris Hilton. Paris has used what has happened to her as a youth and a teen and now advocates for. She intervenes on behalf of, and she rescues those that don't have a voice in the troubled teen industry. She's here today to speak about her own experiences with restraints and seclusion rooms of these out-of-state facilities and support the need for transparency at any time that's being used on these teens. And we welcome her to the California State Capitol.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone.
I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak today. Today I stand before you not just as Paris Hilton, but as an advocate and survivor of the troubled teen industry. I know firsthand the horrors that happen behind the closed doors of youth residential treatment facilities. I know the feeling of helplessness, the despair of being trapped in a system that thrives on secrecy and exploitation. It's a nightmare that no child should ever have to endure. In troubled teen industry facilities in California, Utah, and Montana, I was subjected to abuse disguised as therapy, isolated from the outside world, and denied even the most basic rights. I lived in constant fear, not knowing what would happen to me next. If I tried to tell my parents about the abuse, the staff would immediately rip the phone from my hand, disconnect the call, and subject me to violent physical restraints and solitary confinement. The sounds of my peers screaming as they were restrained and injected with sedatives will never leave me. It's hard to imagine that this still happens today in the USA, but it does, and we cannot ignore it. What's even more disturbing is that my horror story is not unique. Hundreds of thousands of youth experience solitary confinement and deadly physical restraints every year, yet their voices have been silenced and their pain ignored. Last week, I flew to Jamaica to advocate for American boys who had been abused at Atlantis Leadership Academy, an American-owned facility operating in Jamaica. There was a boy from California there. I supported the boys at their court hearing and shined my spotlight on the situation. Because as I've said, if you are abusing children, I will find out, I will find you, and I will come with my huge spotlight and shine it on wherever you are. Because people aren't going to get away with this anymore. Enough is enough. If I hadn't shared their stories, no one would have known what had happened to them. A few days after my visit, 5 staff members were arrested for child abuse and child endangerment. That is accountability. I will fight until every child is safe and keep shining my huge spotlight on these abuses until it cannot be ignored and people are held accountable. California has made so much progress on this issue, and I am so proud to be a resident of the state. Given that California ended the process of sending youth to out-of-state programs due to abuse and deaths occurring, it only makes sense to ensure that facilities in-state are operating with the highest level of transparency and oversight. Advocates like myself shouldn't have to be the ones to shine our spotlights to know the truth. The Accountability in Children's Treatment Act increases transparency so the public knows what truly happens behind closed doors. If these facilities are scared of a simple transparency measure, then I think we should ask them, what do they have to hide? Our current system, designed to reform, in some horrific instances does the exact opposite. It breaks spirits, it instills fear, and it perpetuates a cycle of abuse. But today we have the power to change that. Thank you, Senator Grove, Senator Ashby, Senator Wahab, and the co-sponsors who've listened and believed survivors. I know how it feels to be unheard and misunderstood, and today I have hope that our nation's youth are in much better hands. I have been successful in spite of the abuse I endured, but most children are not that lucky. California Senate and Assembly members, the evidence of abuses happening in these facilities is too widespread and too obvious to ignore any longer. Just imagine if this was happening to your child and you chose not to act. Please pass SB 1043. Thank you.
So our next speaker is from Hayward, who's a joint author on this measure, Senator Wahab, and she's on the public safety. She's the chair of the public safety committee, and she's also an advocate for strengthening safety nets across California for women and children.
Hi, folks. So my name is Aisha Wahab. I'm the senator from the East Bay and South Bay, and I know that we're all here today and asking ourselves, what does an heiress, a Republican, a single mom, and a former foster youth have in common? The honest truth is, we want to protect children, right? regardless of background, belief system, or socioeconomic status. Protecting children is universal. Last year, as chair of Public Senate Safety, Senator Grove and I worked together to ensure human trafficking of children is a serious crime. SB 14 actually passed. And we're here again today because of our joint interest in protecting children. So I first want to thank Senator Grove for her advocacy in this space. As a former foster youth, I'm familiar with how our systems don't live up to the needs of the youth in the state that we are responsible for. And I want to be very clear that these kids are, again, kids, first and foremost. And when they become a ward of the state, it is our responsibility to make sure that they are taken care of, they are protected, and those that we entrust with their care are held at the highest standard of transparency, of accountability, and of much more. And I really just want to thank Paris Hilton for sharing her story. Oftentimes, and again, as myself as a former foster youth, it is hard to share your journey. And it is trauma every single time we share our story. And there are people that like to dance in our trauma and write about it and talk about it and not fully understand that we're human beings. So I really want to thank you for sharing this. It's incredibly important, primarily because of the fact that there are so many other people, as Paris said, that don't have a spotlight, that can't share their story, that are living in the shadows. And largely when we talk about this, this trauma, especially for foster youth and mental health issues, are at a higher level than your average kid with two parents and so forth. And a lot of our foster youth, in fact, recent studies suggest that up to 80% of children in foster care have significant mental health issues compared to approximately to 18 to 22% of children in the general population. This is, again, attributed to trauma, no fault of their own. No fault of their own, right? And the reality is foster youth are less likely to be diagnosed, and the lack of diagnosis and treatment leads to negative externalizing behaviors that result in the display of major behavioral problems. Short-term residential therapeutic programs provide an integrated program of specialized and intensive care and supervision, services and supports, treatment, and short-term 24-hour care and supervision. And sometimes this is what's needed for these kids. But these programs must actually serve the needs of these children. It is our responsibility to protect already vulnerable children from further harm. The fact that there is these rooms that, again, by law, they're not allowed to be locked, but they're held down. And people put their foot in front of it and block the doors and don't give them access and control who they can talk to, who they can ask for help. This not only happens here, but it also happens in our prison systems, right? And sadly, our foster youth literally live in the pipeline to our prison system. And so we want to provide the most amount of care and resources and transparency to these kids early on. So SB 1043 increases transparency through a number of mechanisms that simply amount to good governance. We as the state are responsible for the health and well-being of the youth entrusted to our care, and we must take that responsibility seriously and ensure we are actually acting in the best interest of these youth with the services and programs we are paying for. And I again want to highlight that this is a bipartisan effort because protecting our children goes further and deeper than just what party you belong to. So again, I want to thank Senator Grove for her leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I want you to know that we have our joint author, Senator Ashby from Sacramento, who has a history of working with foster youth and with her time in law school, and she's also built best practices models as her time when she ran a consulting firm.
Well, thank you all for being here. I guess today is a really good example of we have way more in common than we have different in this legislature. And I'm very excited that you're here. I know Sacramento's been a buzz that you are coming, so thank you for being here. But more importantly, thank you for being here for these kids. And not just here, but Jamaica, Sacramento, wherever the world calls you, you seem to be able to meet that need. And I'm very sorry for what happened to you, but I'm really glad to see that you have taken that trauma and you are using it to help fight for kids everywhere. And you're using it to help us fight for kids too. That's amazing and incredible work, and you should be really, really proud of yourself. And I know you're a mom, and I know your kids will grow up and read all about this, and they too will be very, very proud of you.
I'll be like bawling hysterics in a second.
That's our specialty around here. We make people cry. I want to thank Senator Grove. I had a couple of folks in this room, reporters, call and ask me, so you're working with Senator Grove? Yes, of course. Senator Grove has a long history of caring deeply about kids and about women. And I think you see other authors on this stage, other senators on this stage who really want to occupy that space with her. Senator Wahab and I are fairly new here, but we have already kicked the door in on a few more transparencies and a few more things that we think California could do better for foster youth. And this is one more time that we're standing together arm in arm to knock down another door. We want those transparencies for kids. I think we all can be very proud that we live in California. This is a tough subject matter. It may sound easy to you. It may seem like, why didn't we already do this? But the truth is that it takes a lot of people with their lived experiences and a lot of people to rise from those positions to become senators, to then talk about what exactly reform would help us. Senator Grove's bill is actually, I think, monumental. It really does two things that are critically important. One, it documents what's happening in STRTPs, these short-term treatment facilities where we send our kiddos. It documents it with the Department of Social Services on a dashboard. So therefore, if you were a social worker or you were working in a mental health facility and you were looking for a proper and appropriate placement for a kiddo, you'd be able to pull up that dashboard and take a look and see how many times have they used restraints, how many times have they reported needing to put a kid in a quiet room. And then you'd know about that facility. Second of all, and I think this is really important, and this really gets to the heart of what happened to Ms. Hilton, forces you to tell the parents or guardians or social worker or whoever the responsible adult is that is associated with that youth in our system. This is a game changer because this tells the grown-ups in the lives of that child what is happening to them on a daily basis. And this allows you then to change the course of that child's life. Do they need medical help? Do they need other treatment? Is this not a good placement? What's happening there that's creating this need for restraint? And so I am very grateful to everyone on the stage and really proud to be a part of this effort to move California forward in transparency in how we treat children who have the greatest need in the state of California. So thank you, Senator Grove, and thank you, Paris Hilton, for bringing your spotlight to Sacramento.
Thanks, Angelique. So today we also have a great co-author, Janet Wynn, who is she's from Huntington Beach, and she's authored several child protection bills as well. And before I bring Senator Wynn up, I want you to know that every one of these incredible these women that are standing up here with me today, signed on to this bill wholeheartedly before they even knew that Paris Hilton was involved. So they did this because of their heart and passion for the industry that our children that we so desire to protect. And then when they found out Paris Hilton was involved, it was just icing on the cake that she was going to bring her spotlight to this situation, which gave us full confidence that we would be hopefully very successful in this building with this piece of legislation. Senator Wynn.
I want to first thank Senator Grove for her passionate fight to protect California children, and to all my colleagues who are up here with me today. And for those who were hoping to make sure that you do cast a vote, yes, and I vote to support this. I want to thank Paris Hilton for taking your tragedy into a cause to make sure our children, and their families in this state and across the world will know and not to endure this pain again. And for allowing parents to have that choice. Let the parents know, I'm a mom of a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. I want to know where they are. I want to know what's happening to them. I want constant information. If my child needs help, what kind of help. And that's what this is going to be. And this is a game changer for all parents, for all children. And this legislation should be mimicked across the country and around the world. Transparency is the best antiseptic here. This is one of the most important bills the legislator can pass this year because families and the public need to know what is happening in our children's mental health facilities. When I heard of the trauma endured by Ms. Hilton, and in turn most of them all come and go, it reminded me of the Academy Award-winning film, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where governmental institutions have a green light to secretly punish out abuse of powerless individuals. And these are not adults. We're talking about our children here today. If you recall the movie, the nurse was going to do everything in her power to crush the spirit of a patient, played by Jack Nicholson. He wasn't mentally ill, but was going to be forced to comply. This movie horrified our nation about how someone could be trapped in a facility with no way out. This is what we have now with our children. What happens behind those closed doors can traumatize them for the rest of their lives. I would like to hope to see also in the future a study of children 10 years later after they were placed in these restraints or confined to a seclusion room. Where are they now? What happened to them? I have no doubt that I can bet they didn't go very far. Many won't be able to rise above this trauma in adulthood. They won't be able to have the spotlight like Ms. Hilton or like senators who've endured different crises. And yet, this is entirely, we can actually prevent this from happening. Our mental health system needs work, and this bill is a giant step in the right direction. And so I ask all my colleagues, and I ask the governor, once this gets to your desk, Governor, it's time to sign it. It's time to protect our children. Stand by all of us. Stand by the parents. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Senator Wynn, sorry. So I'm also here today. We're going to hear from a survivor, Zoe Shriver. She's a fierce advocate for children and a survivor from the troubled teen industry, and she's going to share her story with you. And again, to highlight Paris, who gives survivors and uplifts those to share their story and puts a spotlight on them. So you guys, the media, can write about this and expose this industry for what it really is. Zoe.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Senator Grove and Paris, for elevating this important issue. My name is Zoe Schreiber. I'm a survivor of the troubled teen industry. At 13, I was sent to a residential facility where I was restrained within the first 36 hours of arriving, all over not eating a pat of butter. For nearly 5 hours in the pouring rain, 6 adults held down my small body, face down in a mud puddle. I will never forget the knee on my shoulder, the cold of my soaked clothes, the eventual numbness in my legs, my pleas of "I can't breathe." In that moment, I was stripped of my dignity, autonomy, and any hope that the staff were there for me to help or protect me. They instilled a fear that any mention of these traumatizing events to my loved ones would lead to more of the same. What followed over the next 4 years were stretches of seclusion, hard labor, and humiliation by staff, watching my peers be subjected to the same torturous treatment and more. I am thankful to be standing here today. Far too many of us aren't. The long-standing traumas have taken a disproportionate amount of survivors. Nearly 15% of my cohort is no longer with us today due to suicides and intentional overdoses. These actions stick with us, impacting our mental and physical well-being for decades after. but they have also fueled the fire that has so many of us fighting for today's kids as we watch these abusive practices continue. Survivors have been driving reforms, but we cannot be the only ones fueling the fight. We need the support of the state and its agencies. The adults in my life were not told of the restraint and seclusions, instead only being told that I was having a hard time adjusting. These abusive practices are carried out in the dark, festering in secrecy. The practice of non-disclosure by programs of these incidents continues to this day, not only to the direct stakeholders in a child's life, but also the licensing agencies tasked with protecting them. SB 1043 addresses this critical awareness gap by requiring the reporting of key data relating to seclusions and restraints, information that should already be collected by compliant licensed facilities. Requiring the Department of Social Services to publicly disclose this information on their website creates clarity and transparency into the punitive practices of these programs. As a licensing and compliance professional, I see firsthand how public reporting can influence enforcement and create positive policy changes. I am proud of the actions that our state has taken towards cutting off out-of-state placements, but that has only brought forth the desperate need for California facilities to provide more transparency and the need for further oversight. The best policy is grounded in data, and the Accountability in Children's Treatment Act provides a critical and foundational step in creating lasting change for California's youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Next, I'd like to invite a champion of children who has fought with me the last few years, along with these other ladies, senators that stand up here with me, Senator Rubio.
Good morning. Well, first of all, I want to thank our champion here, our author, Shannon Grove, who has worked diligently to protect children. And I've been honored to stand with her in so many other bills, from the human trafficking bill to just domestic violence bills. So I could not be more thankful that this clearly is a bipartisan effort to save our children. We have fallen short of the promise to keep them safe. And I will continue to join with these wonderful authors to ensure we continue to push the envelope on keeping them protected. I want to take a moment to thank Paris as well. I think it's really difficult to understand the depth of the trauma someone endures in privacy of either their home or a facility. I stand here before you as a survivor of domestic violence, and I often say that bruises go away within a week or two, but the psychological trauma can come out in many different ways and not healthy ones. And so I'm so thankful for your courage to speak up, because I know that a lot of victims suffer in silence. And I'm a victims advocate, and I've interviewed hundreds of victims, and they all heal in different ways. And as already stated by Zoe, many don't make it. They don't make it. They blame themselves for the trauma that others endured on them. And so today I equate this bill and the importance of it to a bill I passed last year, SB 331, Peaky's Law, which also banned a horrific practice that was allowed here in California. And that was the practice of kidnapping children in the middle of the night, sending them to reunification camps outside the state, tearing our children away from their protective parent for months. And as the children themselves told me, and it's very similar to this bill, constant threats that if you want to speak to your parent, the clock will start over again. If you want to call your grandma or celebrate a birthday, you will never see them again. They have openly talked about the trauma that these programs create. And they are so young and so vulnerable, but yet they come forward with their stories. So as adults, it is important that we listen to them. So I stand here telling all the victims that are still there, sitting in silence. It could be any of you listening. We're here. We hear you. We believe you. We understand you, and we want to keep fighting for you. This bill is going to bring the accountability needed to ensure that no other child or youth suffers in silence. We need to hold those accountable that are harming our children. And we need to ensure that we, as legislators here, move this bill forward, because they need our protection. So I'm also here to urge all my colleagues, the governor, to please pass this bill. Our children are crying out, and many are crying out from their graves because we may be a little too late to save some of those. So again, thank you, Paris, for your lived experience. Your personal story is going to shed light on this so important issue, that it's not a sexy issue to talk about, and a lot of journalists don't cover it. But it is so important that it is important to recognize the bravery of Paris to come forward and tell her story. And my colleague Shannon Grove for constantly not letting up and pushing year after year to save our children, to make it better for our children, to hold those accountable at the highest level, because enough is enough. So again, to victims out there, please come forward. We're here to listen. We're here to continue to try to protect in the best way we can, and in this case, passing legislation that is common sense. Data matters, and we're here to protect you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. Our first male to speak today his name is Michael Mendoza, and he was appointed by the Biden administration as a member of the practitioner of Coordinating Council for Children. And he's also been recognized here in this Capitol building and the California State Assembly floor for his work. So, Mr. Mendoza.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Michael Mendoza, and I'm a consultant and an advocate for children's rights. I want to thank Senator Grove, Senator Ashby, and Senator Wahab for their leadership in introducing this bill. Not only for introducing this bill, but introducing it in a bipartisan way that's going to ensure that we protect our children who find themselves in these facilities. Paris Hilton is right. We cannot ignore this, and enough is enough. When children are restrained or secluded in what they feel as punishment and solitary confinement, they are emotionally scarred and physically abused. Being restrained and secluded as a child can feel very, very hopeless, vulnerable, and heartbreaking. Circumstances I'm personally all too familiar with as well. This is extremely harmful to children, especially during the most important and formative years of their young lives. We know such abuse can create adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs. ACEs are traumatizing and can have lasting effects well into adulthood. The Accountability in Children's Treatment Bill, SB 1043, will strengthen the law and make sure that families, concerned citizens, and the rest of the public are aware of the health and safety of their children in these residential treatment facilities. This should not be a funding concern. We need these dashboards to display the data along with other important measures and guardrails to ensure these harmful practices used on children don't happen at all. These are children and young people who are in need of health and safety, not abuse. Thank you, Mrs. Paris Hilton and Zoe, for your bravery and leadership in this fight for children in California and across the country. I am hopeful that the California legislature will agree and get this bill to the governor's desk to make into law. Please let your elected official know you are here in strong support of the Accountability in Children's Treatment Bill, SB 1043, and want to see it successfully pass and get to the governor's desk to become law as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mendoza. So the last speaker that we have today, before we take questions, her name is Lucinia. She's a Children's Law Center of California, the largest children's legal services organization in the nation, advocating for 25,000 youth in Los Angeles, Sacramento, and Placer County foster youth. Please come forward.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be standing here today with Senator Grove, Senator Ashby, Senator Wahab, the rest of the legislators, Paris Hilton, and Zoe, of course. My name is Luciana Svidler, and I'm the Policy Director at Children's Law Center of California. We are the attorneys for nearly 25,000 children and youth in Los Angeles, Sacramento, and Placer County's foster care system. Many of our clients who live in group care have been exposed to severe trauma. such as physical abuse, sexual abuse, and human trafficking. They have suffered being separated from their siblings, their families, their communities. Many suffer post-traumatic stress disorder. Youth in group care are supposed to be receiving the therapeutic services, nurturing and supports that they need to thrive, but that's not always the case. Too often our clients are placed in large institution-like settings where the staff need better training in trauma and de-escalation, and where the structure of the programs make it difficult for children to build meaningful relationships with adults, further compounding their already significant loss and trauma. In one report on group homes, children in foster care describe feeling shame, unworthy, and isolation. They describe how their trauma was not tended to in a humane way. That's what SB 1043 is really about. Better oversight of group care to stop inhumane treatment of children, including the unnecessary use of restraints and seclusion rooms. Being restrained, especially in their home and by an adult in a position of power, can further traumatize and trigger terrifying memories for children. For some of our clients, the prior trauma is not just remembered, it's relived and re-experienced. SB 1043 is an important and needed piece of legislation. We're very thankful for Senator Grove, Senator Ashby, Senator Wahab, the rest of the co-authors, and Paris Hilton for shedding light on this very important issue. And we look forward to having the bill signed. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you guys recognize that today, regardless of what speaker you listen to, the word trauma kept coming up. Doesn't matter if you're worth $1 billion or you're worth $20, the word trauma is still there. And it's something that you have to live through and adjust to and try to navigate through life regardless. And each one of the ladies that told their stories today, whether it be Paris Hilton or Zoe or the ones that you'll hear in committee, or even Senator Wahab as a foster youth, or Senator Rubio as somebody who's affected by a domestic violence, or even my story as a juvenile hall, incarcerated person. Think about that for a second. I mean, we're all here as women championing those children that deserve us to be championing them in this state. I look out at the live survivors in the audience that aren't up on stage with us today. Just remember that word trauma. The bottom line is it doesn't matter who you are, what color your skin is, how much money you have or don't have, that trauma still exists, and that's why this bill is important. So we'll take questions.